You're on.
I'm on. Before I start my script, which I sort of had prepared, I just wanted to comment briefly, which brought my attention on the skit. They had mentioned treatment for hyperbaric oxygen. And when I was at Sunny Hill, looking after brain-injured children, the idea of providing hyperbaric oxygen to these brain-injured children was raised a number of times. And these brain-injured children were basically from motor vehicle accidents, and a lot of them were in a coma or semi-coma state. We studied this, and actually did have one child have hyperbaric at Vancouver General, and it did not make any difference in the child's recovery. I made contact with neurosurgeons in Vancouver and in the United States, and their conclusion was that if you could provide hyperbaric oxygen to brain-injured children within a half hour, an hour of their accident, maybe you could have some effect. So to think that hyperbaric oxygen is going to help a 2 or 3 year-old child with autism, I think is a waste of $4,000 or $5,000. There are other schemes that I've seen regarding treatment for autism. I've seen kids connected to electrodes, and you can see a computer screen going up and down with different colors, and trying to provide therapy via those programs. And again, I think most people and most parents will try anything to help their child, but I think in a lot of these, you're throwing the money away. And basically what I tell the family is, the thing that's been tried and true and has been most successful and tested is ABA therapy. Some people don't like the term ABA and they do something else, but essentially they're doing a modification of ABA. And so I think one should not lose focus and do what actually is shown to work. So I hadn't thought of presenting that until I heard the skit, but when money is limited, I think it's really important to use your money as most effectively as possible. I have a quote from Albert Einstein. He says in the quote that the world is a dangerous place, not only because of evil, but also because of the people who do not do anything about it. I think if he was here today, he might say about autism, he would say autism is what it is because of what the government doesn't do, what the government doesn't do about it. I would like to thank Mrs. Lewis for inviting me to speak. It is an honor to speak to you. When Mrs. Lewis first mentioned that when she first invited me, I told her that I was more comfortable in my office than I am giving talks. And in fact, the only times I've given talks is for Medicare for autism. And since I thought I would be nervous, I thought I would record my talk and then lip sync it. But I thought if the recorder broke, it would be pretty embarrassing. So now it's time, and I'm not lip syncing. I plan to cover several topics, some statements which I have referred to in the past, some reflections of a practicing pediatrician, some general ideas, and then I have sort of a story from a book that I had found that was very helpful for me. And I'm going to start telling you about the book. I was at the airport and had some extra time, and so I wandered around the bookstore, and I found a book that was titled Too Soon Old and Too Late Smart. And I thought, well, that's me. I had to get it. Has anybody here read that? Or seen it? It's not on any list. 50 best books of fact or fiction. But for me, it was probably the best book that I have ever read. And it's not about autism, but it's about life. And it's about life of a family, and it's about life of a family where children are ill. The author of the book is Gordon Livingston, Dr. Gordon Livingston. He's a psychiatrist in Washington, D.C. And even though this book is not about autism, it covers many aspects of life, and life when you have an ill child. Dr. Livingston himself has had 2 very seriously ill children. His book to me was very thought-provoking and to me very helpful. He covers many important topics, and he does it in a very pleasant, person-to-person way. He tells some jokes, he talks about life, he talks about marriage, he talks about relationships, but most of all, he talks about raising a child or being the parent of a child who has an illness. And of all the things that he talks about, I'm going to pick 2 topics. And the first topic I want to talk to you about, he says, why me? And we all ask the question when our child gets sick, why me? Well, he responds to it by saying, why not me? Tragedies, illnesses happen to everyone, so why not me? So once I understood this, I thought, well, I can get on with things. I don't have to reflect over and over again, why me? I have to accept that it happens, and I'm going to do what I have to do to carry on. The other point that he makes that I thought was very interesting is he talks about the word closure. And he points out basically that there is no closure. So when I was reading this, I just happened to be watching Anderson Cooper on TV, and Anderson Cooper was talking about a tragic event happening in the States, and psychologists and other people were going to the scene to help with closure. And Anderson Cooper said if he heard the word closure one more time, he was going to throw up. Because there is no closure. You know, anyone who's had an ill child, the pain and the concern just never goes away. And this helped me because, in a sense, I could stop looking for closure and get on with what needed to be done. So it wasn't a bad thing to express it because it really enlightened me of what I was feeling and how I should move on. So those 2 points I thought in his book were really very important. And even though it's not about autism, to some degree it is. So I thought I could tell you that. And he's written about 3 books, and they're all very important on a human life situation because he's experienced it and he has the gift to explain it. Now, I've been involved with autistic children and their families for many years, and I do remember the Autism case, and at that time I received a letter from a social worker asking me not to tell parents to request ABA therapy because she wrote, the government will not support the ABA therapy and will not finance it. So this letter was really a clear indication of what was happening at that time. We have come a little way from that. We have improved a little bit, but we obviously have a long way to go. As you can see from today's meeting, the fight for honest medical care for autistic children continues. In this fight for autism care, there are no I's. The autism groups are fighting for all the children with autism and their families. The organizations, the members, the leaders basically continue to blaze away the trail for Medicare for autistic children. That's okay. I thought that was time up or something.
We've got a hook for that.
Yeah. I've often spoken about the inconvenient truths about autism, about the frequency of autism, and the fact that the frequency of autism is like an epidemic. And yet the government does not get the big picture. They do not see the profound effect, the profound impact that autism has on their children and their families. They may see a child who does not speak or socialize, but they do not see the suffering, the child being alone at recess, at lunch, afraid of new things. But the big picture in autism includes the child and their families and the day-to-day, hour-to-hour, month-to-month, year-to-year care that is required. I remember when I was a resident at Montreal Children's, and I was at Montreal Children's for 8 years, that I never saw one child who had autism. There may be one exception. I was making rounds one day, and I saw in a room one child, probably around 7, 8 years old, who was locked in the room, and the room was padded. The patient wasn't mine, so I don't know the exact details. But thinking back and thinking about this for 40 years, I think that's the first child I ever saw who had autism. The frequency of autism, in my memory, was 1 in 10,000. I go back a long way. Then 1 in 5,000, 1 in 1,000, and 1 in 100. And now we got 1 in 68. This is really mind-boggling, and it's really an epidemic. And I don't think government or people realize that this is a global epidemic and we're part of it. This will mean in Vancouver that in every 2 classrooms there will be 1 child with autism. This also means that for $150,000 at the Yoga Bridge, 7 children with autism, 7 children with autism could be treated for a year at the present rate. If you're over age 6, 25 children could be treated for a year. So I think our priorities need to be rethought of. I think besides being an inconvenient truth for the government, is really a sin of silence. I have previously spoken about the discrepancies of medical care for autistic children versus other children with illnesses. And it's really hard to understand and believe that the children who have an illness, not autistic children, but other children, get exactly the treatment they require. It's not hard to believe it, it should be. They get the amount of insulin they need, they get the antibiotics they need, they get the cancer treatment they need, and they're treated to the maximum and to the medical care that the specialists or doctors will prescribe. This doesn't happen in autism because the government dictates the amount of care that the child gets, in their opinion. I've often heard the term the best practice. Well, I think this does not apply in autism. We talked a little bit about the wait lists. We often hear about the wait list for knee surgery and hip surgery, but I rarely, if ever, hear about the wait list for autistic children to be assessed. So if you have to wait a year for surgery and you have to wait for a year to be assessed, I think there's a big difference. One, the wait for surgery is for therapy. The wait for autistic children is for an assessment. So I think just to be assessed and have to wait a year is much more significant. Also, in my mind, if you're a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old and you have to wait a year, I think that's much more significant than an adult waiting.
Yes.
As a pediatrician, how do I feel when I tell a family that the child has autism? Sometimes the parent will ask me, well, how do you know? Because I'm with the family probably for an hour. And I say to them, well, it's because of what you told me, basically, and what I see. Sometimes the diagnosis is easy, and sometimes the diagnosis is difficult. If it's difficult, sometimes I need to see a video of the child, visit the child in the classroom, and almost always get help from other professionals. And I encourage them, if I think the child is autistic, to get early intervention. And that's the reason I'd like to see them early, and I'd like to tell them that the child is autistic, even though I know I'm bringing anguish to them. Because if they get early, intense therapy, I think there's much greater promise for improvement. As I said, it's sometimes easy and sometimes very hard as a pediatrician. Excuse me, maybe I'm lip syncing.
I think there's ones right behind you, brand new ones, or right there.
Here's yours.
Oh, there's yours.
Well, in summary, I can tell you that I don't know why a normal 1-year-old or an 18-year-old, 18-month-old loses language or does not learn to speak. And I don't know why they lack social interaction and why they have obsessive tendencies. And I do not know why the incidence of autism has skyrocketed. What I do know is that each autistic child I see is trying their best to learn to speak, to play in the playground, to play at school, to be accepted by their classmates. And I know that their parents, their remarkable parents, are doing everything they can to help their child. Thank you.